What happens when a single moment of truth threatens to shatter the carefully constructed image of the British royal family? When a loyal palace guard, sworn to silence and service, finds himself holding evidence that could rewrite history books and destroy reputations built over decades. In the shadowed corridors of Buckingham Palace, where whispers carry more weight than official statements and loyalty is both currency and weapon, one man's conscience would soon collide with the most protected secrets of the monarchy. What began as a routine accusation from the Queen Consort would spiral into a revelation so shocking that it would force everyone involved to question everything they thought they knew about honor, truth, and the price of keeping royal secrets. This is not just another palace scandal. This is the story of how one guard's decision to speak truth to power would expose a web of deception that reached the very heart of the crown, threatening not just careers and reputations, but the very foundation of trust that the modern monarchy depends upon. Some secrets are buried for good reason. Others are buried to protect the guilty. And sometimes it takes just one person with the courage to dig up the truth to change everything forever. Detective Inspector James Mitchell had seen enough crime scenes in his 20-year career with the Metropolitan Police to know when something didn't add up. But standing in the opulent drawing room of Clarence House at midnight, surrounded by priceless antiques and the suffocating weight of royal protocol, he felt more out of place than he ever had in the grittiest corners of London. The call had come through the special direct line reserved for matters involving the royal family. A theft, they said. Sensitive documents missing from Queen Consort Camilla's private study. The kind of case that required absolute discretion and immediate attention, regardless of the hour. Inspector Mitchell? The voice belonged to Sir Anthony Pemberton, Camilla's private secretary, a man whose perfectly pressed suit and calculating eyes suggested he'd been awake and fully dressed despite the late hour. Thank you for coming so quickly. Her Majesty is most concerned about this matter. James nodded, pulling out his notebook. He'd been briefed on the basics during the drive over, but royal cases always came with layers of complexity that weren't immediately apparent. I understand some documents have gone missing. Can you walk me through what happened? Sir Anthony's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Her Majesty discovered the theft earlier this evening when she went to retrieve some correspondence from her private safe. The documents in question are personal in nature, family matters that would be of considerable interest to certain members of the press. What kind of documents specifically? James asked, his pen poised over the notepad. Letters, primarily. Some financial records. Nothing that would interest the general public, but potentially embarrassing if taken out of context. Sir Anthony's rehearsed tone suggested this explanation had been carefully crafted. We believe the theft occurred sometime between 6 and 10 o'clock this evening, during the changing of the guard. James looked up from his notes. You suspect one of the guards? We suspect someone with intimate knowledge of the house and Her Majesty's routines, Sir Anthony replied carefully. The safe wasn't forced. Whoever took those documents knew the combination. The implications hung heavy in the air. An inside job involving the royal family was every police officer's nightmare and every tabloid editor's dream. James had handled sensitive cases before, but nothing quite like this. I'll need to speak with Her Majesty directly, James said. Sir Anthony shifted uncomfortably. That may not be necessary, Inspector. I can provide you with all the relevant information. With respect, Sir Anthony, in a theft investigation, I need to speak with the victim. Royal protocol doesn't override police procedure. 20 minutes later, James found himself in Camilla's private sitting room, a surprisingly cozy space filled with family photographs and well-worn furniture that spoke of actual use rather than ceremonial display. The Queen Consort herself appeared genuinely distressed, though James's trained eye noted something else beneath the surface anxiety. Inspector, thank you for coming at such an hour, Camilla said, gesturing for him to sit. This is a most troubling situation. Your Majesty, I understand this is difficult, but I need you to walk me through exactly what happened tonight. Camilla's hands fluttered nervously as she spoke. I had dinner with friends returned around 9:30. I went to my study to check on some correspondence before bed. That's when I discovered the safe was open and several items were missing. You're certain you locked the safe when you last accessed it? Absolutely. I'm very particular about that. Those documents, she paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. They contain private family matters, old correspondence, some financial arrangements from years past. Nothing illegal, of course, but potentially misconstrued if they fell into the wrong hands. James made notes, but something about her manner suggested there was more to the story. Who else knows the combination to your safe? Only myself and... Camilla hesitated. Only myself. The pause was telling. James had interviewed enough suspects and victims to recognize when someone was holding back crucial information. Your Majesty, if someone else had access to the combination, it would help narrow down our investigation. Camilla exchanged a glance with Sir Anthony, who had remained standing near the door like a sentinel. Perhaps we should discuss the security arrangements first, Sir Anthony interjected. But James was more interested in what Camilla wasn't saying. Your Majesty, these documents that were taken, can you be more specific about their contents? Even if they're personal, understanding what someone might want with them could help us determine motive. They're old letters, Camilla said quickly. Correspondence from years ago. Personal matters that would be of no value to anyone outside the family. Then why would someone steal them? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Camilla's composure wavered slightly, and James caught a glimpse of genuine fear beneath the royal training. Inspector, Sir Anthony intervened again. Perhaps we should focus on the security breach itself. We have CCTV footage from the corridors, and we can provide you with a list of everyone who had access to this wing of the house during the relevant time frame. James nodded but filed away his observations about Camilla's evasiveness. In his experience, the most important information in any investigation was often what people were trying not to tell him. The security office was located in the basement of Clarence's house, a maze of monitoring equipment and filing cabinets that seemed to exist in a different century from the grand rooms upstairs. Chief Security Officer Robert Hayes, a former military man with the bearing to prove it, was waiting with several hours of footage queued up. Here's what we've got, Hayes said, pointing to multiple monitor screens. The corridor outside Her Majesty's study from 6 p.m. onwards. James watched as various figures moved through the ornate hallway. Staff members, guards, and what appeared to be maintenance personnel. The image quality was excellent, but the angles were limited. Stop there, James said as a figure appeared on screen around 8:15. Who's that? Hayes leaned forward. That's Thomas Hartwell, one of our most senior guards. Been with the household for 8 years. On screen, Thomas Hartwell moved purposefully down the corridor, his bearing suggesting someone entirely comfortable in his surroundings. He paused outside what James assumed was Camilla's study, seemed to check his watch, then continued out of frame. Does he normally patrol that area at that time? But guards do make irregular rounds throughout the evening. Hayes fast-forwarded through more footage. Here he is again at 9:10. This time, Hartwell appeared to be moving more quickly, and James noticed he was carrying what looked like a small briefcase or document folder. That's interesting, James murmured. Can you get me a clear shot of what he's carrying? Hayes worked the controls, zooming and enhancing the image. The object in Hartwell's hand was definitely some kind of portfolio or folder, but the angle made it impossible to determine its contents. I'll need to speak with Hartwell immediately, James said. That might be difficult, Hayes replied, checking his roster. He's not scheduled to return until Thursday. He requested personal leave yesterday, said he had a family emergency. James felt the familiar tingle that came with a significant break in a case. What kind of family emergency? Just said he needed 3 days off urgently. Unusual for Hartwell. He's normally very reliable. Do you have his home address? 20 minutes later, James was driving through the quiet streets of South London toward Thomas Hartwell's flat in Elephant and Castle. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. A guard with access to Camilla's private areas requesting emergency leave the same night documents went missing from her safe. But as he navigated the empty roads, James found himself thinking about Camilla's behavior during the interview. Her nervousness could be explained by the stress of the situation, but her evasiveness about the document's contents suggested something more complex than a simple theft. Hartwell's building was a converted Victorian house divided into flats, the kind of place where nobody paid much attention to their neighbors' comings and goings. James pressed the buzzer for flat 3B. and waited. No response. He tried again, holding the button longer this time. He's not there. James turned to find an elderly woman emerging from the ground floor flat, a small dog on a leash beside her. "I'm Detective Inspector Mitchell," James said, showing his warrant card. "When did you last see Mr. Hartwell?" "Yesterday evening, around 7. Saw him leaving with a suitcase. Looked like he was going somewhere for more than just overnight." "Did he say anything about where he was going?" "Not to me, but he did have someone with him. A woman, well-dressed, expensive car. Not the sort who usually visits around here." James felt another piece click into place. "Can you describe the woman?" "Older lady, probably in her 70s. Gray hair, very proper-looking. The kind who'd know which fork to use at a fancy dinner, if you know what I mean." The description could fit any number of people, but in the context of a case involving stolen royal documents, it raised intriguing possibilities. If Hartwell had taken the documents, why would he immediately flee with an unidentified woman? And why had Camilla been so evasive about what the documents actually contained? Most importantly, if this was a simple theft case, why did he have the growing feeling that everyone involved knew more than they were telling him? His phone rang as he started the engine. The caller ID showed his sergeant back at the station. "Mitchell here. Boss, we've had a development. Remember that case file you requested on Thomas Hartwell? Turns out he's not just any palace guard. His personnel file has some interesting history." "What kind of history?" "He used to work for a private security firm that specialized in high-profile investigations. Corporate espionage, background checks on public figures, that sort of thing. Before that, he was military intelligence." James felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. This wasn't shaping up to be a simple theft case at all. If Hartwell had an intelligence background and access to Camilla's private documents, the implications could be far more serious than anyone at Clarence House had suggested. "There's more," his sergeant continued. "I did some digging into his financial records. He's been making regular payments to an offshore account for the past 18 months. Significant amounts more than his salary would normally allow." "How significant?" "Try £10,000 a month." James ended the call and sat in his car outside Hartwell's empty flat, trying to process what he'd learned. A palace guard with intelligence training, making mysterious payments to offshore accounts, who'd disappeared with an unidentified woman the same night sensitive documents went missing from the Queen Consort's safe. But the more he thought about it, the more James began to wonder if he was asking the wrong questions. Instead of focusing on what Hartwell had stolen, perhaps he should be asking why Camilla was so desperate to get it back, and what those documents really contained that was worth risking a scandal involving the crown. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Inspector Mitchell, we need to talk. What you think you know about tonight is only the beginning. The real story is much more dangerous than anyone has told you. Meet me tomorrow at noon at Cafe Nero on Victoria Street. Come alone. Th. Thomas Hartwell was reaching out, but instead of the simple resolution James had hoped for, the case was becoming more complex by the hour. As he drove back through London's empty streets, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something far larger and more dangerous than a routine theft investigation. The documents in question weren't just embarrassing family correspondence, and Thomas Hartwell wasn't just a guard who'd gotten greedy. Whatever was really going on behind the palace walls, James was beginning to suspect that the truth might be more shocking than anyone was prepared for. The morning brought no relief from the questions that had kept James Mitchell awake most of the night. By 11 a.m., he was positioned at a corner table in Cafe Nero on Victoria Street, nursing his second coffee and watching every person who entered. The lunch crowd was beginning to gather, providing perfect cover for a clandestine meeting. Thomas Hartwell arrived precisely at noon, but he was nothing like James had expected. Instead of a nervous criminal looking over his shoulder, Hartwell moved with the calm confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Mid-40s, average height, with the kind of unremarkable appearance that would make him invisible in any crowd. Exactly what you'd want in someone trained for intelligence work. "Inspector Mitchell," Hartwell said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming." "Before we start," James said, "I should inform you that you're currently a suspect in a theft investigation. Anything you say can and will be used against me in court, yes, I know." Hartwell's smile held no humor. But I'm not here to confess to a crime, Inspector. I'm here to prevent one. What do you mean? Hartwell glanced around the cafe, then leaned forward slightly. The documents I took from Camilla's safe last night weren't stolen. They were rescued. And what I'm about to tell you will change everything you think you know about this case. James kept his expression neutral, though his instincts were screaming that whatever Hartwell was about to reveal would complicate an already complex situation. I'm listening. My name is Thomas Hartwell, and yes, I've been working as a palace guard for 8 years, but that's not my primary job. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I'm a deep-cover investigative journalist. I've been working on a story that goes to the very heart of how the modern monarchy operates. The revelation hit James like a physical blow. You're telling me you've been working undercover at Clarence House for 8 years? Not originally. I took the job legitimately, but about 3 years ago I stumbled onto something that made me realize there was a much bigger story to be told. A story about financial irregularities, abuse of influence, and cover-ups that reach the highest levels of the royal establishment. James's mind raced with the implications. And these documents you took from Camilla's safe? They're evidence. Proof of payments that were made to cover up a scandal that would have destroyed several reputations if it had come to light. Hartwell reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder. These copies will show you what I'm talking about. Before I look at anything, James said, I need you to understand that if you've committed a theft, regardless of your motivations, I have a duty to arrest you. Inspector, by the time you've seen what's in this folder, I think you'll agree that theft is the least of our concerns. James opened the folder and immediately understood why Camilla had been so evasive about its contents. The documents inside weren't old family correspondence at all. They were bank statements, transfer records, and what appeared to be correspondence between Camilla's office and several financial institutions. The amounts were staggering. Over the past 5 years, more than £2 million had been moved through various accounts, always in amounts just below the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting to financial authorities. But it was the memo attached to one of the transfers that made James's blood run cold. Parker Settlement Final Payment, to ensure silence regarding C's involvement in 2019 incident. Confirm recipient understanding that disclosure will result in immediate legal action and permanent exclusion from all royal events. What was the 2019 incident? That's where it gets really interesting, Hartwell said. Do you remember the tabloid stories about a young palace employee who supposedly had a nervous breakdown and left her position suddenly? Sarah Parker, James said slowly. The name was coming back to him now. There had been brief media coverage about a junior staff member who'd been hospitalized after what was described as work-related stress. Sarah Parker was a 24-year-old events coordinator who was assaulted by someone very close to Camilla during a private function at Highgrove. When she tried to report it through official channels, she was told that she had misunderstood what happened. When she insisted on filing a formal complaint, she suddenly found herself facing accusations of theft and improper conduct. James felt the case shifting beneath his feet again. What kind of accusations? Missing petty cash, inappropriate behavior with male staff members, drinking on duty. All complete fabrications, but enough to destroy her credibility and justify her immediate dismissal. Hartwell's voice carried barely contained anger. She was going to fight it, go to the press, file a lawsuit. And then suddenly, she wasn't. The payments, James realized. £2 million to make Sarah Parker disappear and stay quiet. The money has been flowing to her through various channels ever since, with the understanding that one word about what really happened would result in the full force of the royal legal machine coming down on her. James studied the documents again, his police training warring with the enormity of what he was seeing. How do you know all this? 'Cause Sarah Parker is my sister. The simple statement recontextualized everything. This wasn't just a journalistic investigation or even a case of professional outrage. This was personal. She came to me 18 months ago, Hartwell continued. She'd been taking their money and staying quiet, but the guilt was destroying her. She wanted to tell the truth, but she was terrified of what would happen. That's when I decided to get the evidence needed to protect her. By infiltrating the royal household. by documenting a pattern of behavior that shows this wasn't an isolated incident. Sarah wasn't the first young woman to be silenced, Inspector. She was just the most expensive. James's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Sir Anthony Pemberton's name appeared on the screen. Inspector Mitchell? I trust your investigation is progressing smoothly. Her Majesty is most anxious to have this matter resolved quickly and quietly. We're making progress, James said carefully, aware that Hartwell was listening to every word. Excellent. I wanted to inform you that we've conducted our own internal investigation and believe we've identified the perpetrator. One of our guards, Thomas Hartwell, has a history of financial difficulties and access to Her Majesty's private areas. We'll be terminating his employment immediately and would appreciate it if charges could be filed as soon as possible. The speed with which they were moving to pin the blame on Hartwell was telling. Sir Anthony, I'm still conducting my investigation. I'll need to complete my interviews before making any arrests. Of course, Inspector, but I'm sure you understand the need for discretion in this matter. The sooner we can put this unpleasantness behind us, the better for all concerned. After ending the call, James found Hartwell watching him with a knowing expression. They're moving to frame you, James said. I expected as much. That's why I needed to meet with you today. Inspector, you have a choice to make. You can arrest me for theft and allow this whole thing to disappear into the royal legal system, or you can help me expose a pattern of corruption and abuse that's been covered up for years. James looked at the documents again. Even if everything Hartwell was telling him was true, the implications of investigating members of the royal family were staggering. His career would be over, and there was no guarantee that any of it would ever see the light of day. Why should I believe you? How do I know this isn't all fabricated? Hartwell reached for his phone and scrolled through several contacts before finding what he was looking for. Because I can prove everything I've told you. And because there are others who've been waiting years for someone with the authority to investigate. He dialed a number and put the phone on speaker. Hello? The voice was female, young, and carried traces of the same working-class London accent that Hartwell had been suppressing during their conversation. Sarah, it's Tom. I'm here with Inspector Mitchell from the Metropolitan Police. Are you ready to tell him what really happened? There was a long pause before the woman responded. Is he someone we can trust? James found himself speaking before he'd consciously decided to. Miss Parker, I'm investigating the theft of documents from Clarence House. But based on what I've heard today, I think there may be more to this story than I was originally told. Inspector, Sarah Parker's voice was stronger now. What they did to me was wrong. What they're still doing to other people is wrong. If you're willing to listen, I'll tell you everything. For the next hour, James listened as Sarah Parker recounted the events of a night in September 2019 that had destroyed her life and led to years of enforced silence. Her story was detailed, specific, and utterly convincing. More importantly, she had kept careful records of every payment, every conversation, and every threat that had followed. Inspector, she said as she concluded her account, I know what I'm risking by talking to you. But Tom's shown me documents that prove I wasn't the only one. There are other women, other cover-ups. This has to stop. When the call ended, James sat in silence for several minutes, processing what he'd heard. The case had evolved far beyond a simple theft investigation. He was now looking at potential criminal activity involving some of the most protected people in the country. What do you need from me? He finally asked Hartwell. And protection. The moment they realize what I actually have, they'll use every resource at their disposal to discredit me and make this disappear. But if you can keep the investigation open long enough, I can get you access to everything. What kind of everything? Financial records going back a decade. Correspondence between Camilla's office and fixers who specialize in making problems disappear. Evidence of at least 6 other cases similar to Sarah's. Hartwell leaned forward intently. Inspector, what we're looking at isn't just about one assault or even one cover-up. It's about a system that has been protecting certain people while destroying anyone who threatens their reputation. This time it was his superintendent, Mitchell. I've just had a very interesting call from someone at the palace. They're concerned about the direction of your investigation and want to ensure that you're focusing on the actual crime rather than getting distracted by unsubstantiated allegations. Sir, I'm following the evidence wherever it leads. That's commendable, Inspector, but remember that we serve the public interest, not the interests of conspiracy theorists and troublemakers. The theft of documents from a royal residence is a serious matter, but so is protecting the reputation of our institutions. After ending the call, James realized that the pressure to bury this investigation was coming from multiple directions. The royal establishment wanted Hartwell arrested, and the whole matter swept away. His own superiors were already signaling that pursuing the larger implications would not be career-enhancing. But across the table sat a man who had spent years gathering evidence of systematic corruption and abuse. And somewhere in London, Sarah Parker and potentially other women were waiting to see if the justice system would finally listen to their stories. "There's something else," Hartwell said, apparently reading the conflict in James's expression. "The woman who helped me leave my flat yesterday, the one your neighbor described, who was she?" "Lady Margaret Thornfield. She used to work in Camilla's office until she discovered what was happening and tried to raise concerns through proper channels. She was quietly forced out 3 years ago, but she's been documenting everything ever since." "Another witness?" "More than that. She has access to internal communications that show this pattern of behavior goes back over a decade. She's been waiting for the right moment to come forward, and she thinks your investigation might be it." James looked at his watch. In 2 hours, he was supposed to file his preliminary report on the theft investigation. He could write up Hartwell as the primary suspect, recommend charges, and close the case. It would be neat, simple, and career-safe. Or he could acknowledge that he had stumbled onto something much larger and more dangerous than anyone wanted him to pursue. "If I continue this investigation," James said slowly, "if I treat this as more than just a theft case, I need you to understand something. I'll be conducting a real police investigation, not helping you with some journalistic exposé. That means everything has to be done properly, legally, and with proper evidence." "I understand. And if I find out you've lied to me about anything, or if any of your evidence turns out to be fabricated, I'll arrest you myself." "Fair enough." James closed the folder containing the documents and made his decision. "Then let's go talk to Lady Margaret Thornfield." As they left the cafe together, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line from which there would be no return. Whatever happened next, the theft of documents from Clarence House was going to become the least significant aspect of this investigation. Lady Margaret Thornfield lived in a converted carriage house in Kensington, the kind of elegant but modest residence that suggested old money carefully managed rather than ostentatious wealth. When she opened the door to James and Thomas Hartwell, her first words were not a greeting, but a warning.
"Inspector, I hope you understand what you're getting yourself into."
"Once you hear what I have to tell you, there will be people in very high places who consider you a threat." James had been a police officer long enough to recognize when someone was deadly serious. Lady Margaret's bearing spoke of decades spent navigating the highest levels of British society, but her eyes held the wariness of someone who had learned that privilege could be as dangerous as it was protective. "Lady Margaret, I'm investigating a theft case that appears to have broader implications. Mr. Hartwell has suggested you have information that might be relevant." "Relevant," she repeated with a bitter laugh. "Inspector, what I have is a decade's worth of evidence showing systematic corruption, abuse of power, and criminal cover-ups at the highest levels of the royal household. Whether that's relevant to your theft case depends entirely on how much truth you're prepared to uncover." She led them into a sitting room lined with bookcases and filing cabinets, the organized workspace of someone who had been methodically building a case for years. On a large oak table, manila folders were arranged in neat stacks, each labeled with dates and names. "I worked in Camilla's private office for 12 years, Lady Margaret began, settling into a chair across from them. "I started as an assistant and eventually became her deputy private secretary. I thought I was working for someone dedicated to public service and charitable works. It took me far too long to realize what I was actually facilitating." She opened one of the folders and withdrew a bundle of correspondence. "These are internal memos dating back to 2015. They document what we euphemistically called reputation management, the process of identifying potential threats to Camilla's public image and neutralizing them." James examined the documents. They were written in the careful language of bureaucracy, but their meaning was unmistakable. Lists of journalists who had asked uncomfortable questions, along with notes about their financial situations, personal relationships, and potential vulnerabilities, dossiers on former staff members who might possess damaging information, plans for what to do if certain stories ever emerged. This is intelligence gathering, James realized. We had a network of private investigators, former security service personnel, and well-placed sources throughout the media. Our job was to know about problems before they became public and to make sure they never did become public. Thomas Hartwell leaned forward. "Show him the Parker file." Lady Margaret's expression darkened. Sarah Parker wasn't the first, Inspector. She was just the one who refused to go quietly. She opened another folder, this one significantly thicker. Inside were photographs, medical records, financial documents, and what appeared to be surveillance reports. When Sarah made her initial complaint about the assault, my first instinct was to handle it through proper channels. But I was told that there had been a misunderstanding, that Sarah was emotionally unstable, and that the best thing for everyone would be to quietly resolve the situation. What changed your mind?
I started asking questions about other cases.
Other young women who had left their positions suddenly. Other situations that required delicate handling. What I found made me sick. She spread out a series of photographs showing young women at various royal events. Each photo had a name and date written on the back. Jennifer Morrison, 2016, accused her supervisor of sexual harassment during the Queen's birthday celebrations. Suddenly found herself facing allegations of drug use and was quietly dismissed. Emma Richardson, 2017, reported inappropriate behavior by a senior household member. Developed what her doctor called severe workplace anxiety and took early retirement. Charlotte Webb, 2018, complained about being pressured to ignore financial irregularities. She discovered had a complete nervous breakdown and left public life entirely. James studied the photographs and documentation. Are you saying all these women were silenced? I'm saying that whenever someone posed a threat to the carefully constructed image of the royal household, they experienced sudden career-ending problems that made continuing their complaints impossible. Lady Margaret's voice carried years of suppressed anger, and in every case, there were financial arrangements that ensured their continued silence. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate, 8 to 10 million pounds over the past decade, all carefully laundered through charitable foundations, consulting fees, and spurious legal settlements. The scope was breathtaking. James had investigated corruption cases before, but never on this scale or involving people this powerful. Lady Margaret, he said carefully. These are serious allegations. Do you have proof that connects these payments to specific cover-ups? She smiled grimly and walked to one of the filing cabinets. Inspector, I spent 12 years in that office. I know where everybody is buried. She returned with a bound document that looked like a legal brief. I've been working with a QC who specializes in constitutional law. Everything in here is documented, cross-referenced, and legally sound. James opened the document and immediately understood why Lady Margaret had been so careful about security. The contents read like an indictment of the entire system that surrounded the modern monarchy. Financial improprieties, abuse of influence, systematic intimidation of potential witnesses, and evidence of corruption that reached far beyond Clarence House. There's more, Thomas Hartwell said quietly. Show him the Pemberton material. Lady Margaret hesitated. Sir Anthony Pemberton has been the architect of much of this, but he's also been documenting his own activities as insurance. Insurance against what? Against the day when someone higher up decided to throw him under the bus. He's kept copies of every order he's carried out, every payment he's authorized, every threat he's made on behalf of the royal household. She opened another folder to reveal what appeared to be financial records and correspondence in Sir Anthony's distinctive handwriting. He's been skimming money from the cover-up funds. Not much, a few thousand here and there, but enough to ensure that he has leverage if he ever needs it. James felt the investigation expanding again. Not only were they looking at systematic abuse and cover-ups, but also embezzlement by the very people who were supposed to be managing the royal household's integrity. How did you get access to this material? Sir Anthony's secretary is my niece. She's been horrified by what she's had to facilitate over the past few years. When she realized what I was working on, she started making copies of everything that crossed her desk. The web of complicity was staggering. James was beginning to understand that this wasn't a case of a few bad actors, but an entire system that had evolved to protect certain people while destroying anyone who threatened them. His phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Inspector Mitchell? This is Sarah Parker. I know I'm supposed to wait for you to contact me, but there's something I need to tell you immediately. What is it, Miss Parker? I just received a call from Sir Anthony Pemberton's office. They want to meet with me tomorrow morning. They say it's about resolving our ongoing arrangements. But, Inspector, I think they know that I've been talking to you. James felt a chill. If the royal household was moving to silence Sarah Parker, it suggested they were aware the investigation was expanding beyond a simple theft case. Miss Parker, don't meet with them. Don't go anywhere alone, and don't talk to anyone from the royal household without a lawyer present. Inspector, there's something else. The woman who called me claimed to be from Sir Anthony's office, but I recognized her voice. It was Charlotte Webb, one of the other women who was paid to stay quiet. She's working for them now. After ending the call, James turned to find Lady Margaret and Thomas Hartwell watching him with grim expressions. They're cleaning house, Lady Margaret said simply. Once they realize how much evidence we have, they'll move to discredit or silence everyone involved. Which is why, Thomas Hartwell added, we need to move quickly. Inspector, how much authority do you have to protect witnesses? Some, but not enough if we're talking about threats from the royal household. I can arrange police protection, but that would mean going public with the investigation. Which might be exactly what we need to do, Lady Margaret said. Inspector, the only reason this system has been able to operate for so long is because it's been hidden. The moment it's exposed to public scrutiny, it becomes much harder for them to intimidate people.
James considered the implications.
Going public with an investigation involving the royal family would create a media firestorm that could damage not just the people involved, but the institution of the monarchy itself. Before I make any decisions about how to proceed, he said, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. How high does this go? Lady Margaret and Thomas Hartwell exchanged a look that suggested they had been debating this question themselves. That's the problem, Lady Margaret said finally. Some of this clearly originated with Camilla's office, but other aspects suggest coordination with Buckingham Palace itself. We have evidence of payments and communications that could only have been authorized at the highest levels. You're talking about King Charles? We're talking about a system that protects the monarchy by destroying anyone who threatens it, whether the king himself is directly involved or simply being protected by people acting in his name. The effect is the same. ASM.James' phone buzzed with a text message from his superintendent. Mitchell, need to see you in my office immediately. We've received some concerning reports about your investigation. The pressure was mounting from multiple directions. The royal household wanted the investigation shut down. His superiors were getting nervous about where it was leading, and the witnesses he needed to protect were potentially in danger. I need to go back to the station, James said, standing up. But I want both of you to stay here tonight. Don't go home, don't use your regular phones, and don't contact anyone without clearing it with me first. Inspector, Lady Margaret said as he headed toward the door, there's one more thing you need to know. We have evidence that suggests they've used these tactics against journalists and politicians as well. This isn't just about protecting Camilla from embarrassment. It's about maintaining a system of influence and control that reaches far beyond the royal household. On the drive back to the station, James tried to process the magnitude of what he had uncovered. What had started as a routine theft investigation had revealed systematic corruption, criminal cover-ups, and abuse of power that implicated some of the most powerful people in the country. The question now was whether the British justice system was strong enough to investigate and prosecute crimes committed by and on behalf of the royal family. James was about to find out if there really was one law for everyone, or if some people truly were above accountability. His superintendent's expression when he walked into the office told him everything he needed to know about how difficult the next conversation was going to be. Superintendent David Harrison had been James Mitchell's mentor for over a decade, but the man sitting behind the imposing desk looked like he'd aged years in the past few hours. The strain lines around his eyes and the careful way he was choosing his words told James that this conversation had been orchestrated from much higher up the chain of command. James, sit down. We need to discuss the direction of your investigation into the Clarence House incident. Sir, if this is about the scope of the investigation, I should tell you that we've uncovered evidence of serious criminal activity that goes far beyond the original theft complaint. Before you say anything else, I want you to understand that I've spent the morning in meetings with the Assistant Commissioner, representatives from the Crown Prosecution Service, and officials from the Cabinet Office. Everyone is very concerned about where this investigation appears to be heading. James felt the familiar weight of institutional pressure, but also a growing determination not to let it derail the pursuit of justice. Sir, are you ordering me to limit the scope of my investigation? I'm telling you that investigating members of the royal family requires authorization at the highest levels of government. It's not something a detective inspector can decide to do on his own initiative. And what if the evidence clearly shows criminal activity? Harrison leaned back in his chair, and James could see the conflict playing out on his face. James, you're a good copper, one of the best I've worked with. That's why I'm hoping you'll listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The tone was ominous, but James remained silent. There are forces at work here that are bigger than either of us. The stability of our constitutional system depends on maintaining public confidence in our institutions. Sometimes that means making difficult choices about which battles to fight. Are you telling me to drop the investigation? I'm telling you to focus on what you can prove about the original theft complaint. Thomas Hartwell took documents from Clarence House without authorization. That's a crime, regardless of his motivations. Arrest him, charge him, and let the court sort out any larger issues he wants to raise. James had known this moment would come, but he'd hoped to have more time to build his case before facing it. Sir, I have evidence of systematic corruption, witness intimidation, and financial crimes involving millions of pounds. Are you saying I should ignore all of that? I'm saying that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that investigating the royal family carries extraordinary risks for everyone involved. Harrison's voice carried a warning. There are people who think your investigation has already gone too far. What people? People who could make sure you never work in law enforcement again. People who could destroy your reputation and your life if they decide you're a threat to national security. The threat was unmistakable, even couched in Harrison's careful language. James understood that he was being given one last chance to step back from the brink. And if I refuse to limit the investigation, then you'll be removed from the case and reassigned to duties that don't involve sensitive matters. The investigation will be handed to someone who understands the importance of discretion. James sat quietly for several moments, weighing his options. He could accept the limitations, arrest Thomas Hartwell for theft, and allow the larger crimes to remain hidden. It would be the safe choice, the career-preserving choice. Or he could refuse, knowing that it would likely end his police career but might be the only way to ensure that justice was served. Sir, I need some time to think about this. You have until tomorrow morning. But James, whatever you decide, remember that there are consequences for everyone involved in this situation, not just for you, but for anyone who's been feeding you information. The implied threat against Thomas Hartwell, Lady Margaret, and Sarah Parker was clear. James was being told that pursuing justice for them would only result in more harm coming to them. As he left Harrison's office, James's phone rang. The caller ID showed Thomas Hartwell. Inspector, we have a problem. Lady Margaret received a visit from two men claiming to be from a private security firm. They wanted to discuss her ongoing consulting work with various parties. Where is she now? Safe, but shaken. Inspector, they knew things about her finances, her family, her health history. This wasn't a fishing expedition. They had detailed intelligence on her. James felt the net closing around all of them. Are you both still at her house? No, we moved to a secure location. But Inspector, there's something else. Sarah Parker didn't come home last night. Her neighbors saw her leave with two well-dressed people yesterday evening, but she hasn't been seen since. The escalation was happening faster than James had anticipated. If Sarah Parker had been taken or intimidated into silence, it would eliminate his most important witness and send a clear message to anyone else considering cooperation with the investigation. Have you filed a missing person report? That's complicated. She received what appeared to be a legitimate invitation to a meeting about her ongoing arrangements with the royal household. If she went voluntarily, the police won't treat it as a disappearance for at least 24 hours. James checked his watch. It had been 18 hours since Sarah was last seen. In 6 hours, he could file an official missing person report. But by then, it might be too late. Thomas, I need you and Lady Margaret to stay hidden until I can figure out how to protect you. Don't use your phones. Don't go anywhere public. And don't trust anyone who claims to be helping. Inspector, there's something else you need to know. Before Lady Margaret's visitors arrived, she managed to upload everything to a secure server. If something happens to us, there are instructions for the evidence to be released automatically. It was a desperate gambit, but possibly their only insurance against being silenced permanently. James ended the call and sat in his car outside the police station, trying to decide what to do next. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Inspector Mitchell, if you want to see Sarah Parker again, you'll meet me at the Millennium Bridge at 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. Bring all copies of documents related to your investigation. The message was unsigned, but James had no doubt about who had sent it. Someone with access to Sarah Parker and the power to make her disappear was now making demands. James drove home to his flat in Islington, but instead of going inside, he parked across the street and watched for 20 minutes. His police training had taught him to recognize surveillance, and the two men sitting in a car near his building were clearly not residents. Using his mobile, he called his ex-wife Rachel, the investigative journalist who had covered several high-profile corruption cases. James, this is a surprise. Is everything all right? Rachel, I need a favor, and I need you to not ask questions until later. That sounds ominous. What's going on? I'm working on a case that's gotten complicated. There are people who want to stop my investigation, and I need someone I trust to hold on to some evidence in case something happens to me. James, you're scaring me. What kind of case involves people threatening police officers? The kind where the suspects have enough power to make police officers disappear. Rachel, can you meet me somewhere public in an hour? They arranged to meet at a crowded pub in Camden, where James quickly briefed her on the essential details of his investigation. He gave her copies of the most damning documents and explained how to contact Thomas Hartwell and Lady Margaret if he didn't check in within 24 hours. This is insane, Rachel said after reviewing the evidence. You're talking about systematic corruption involving the royal family. This could bring down the government, which is exactly why they're so desperate to stop it from coming out. Rachel, if something happens to me, promise me you'll make sure this gets published. James, maybe you should just walk away. There has to be someone else who can handle this. I'm probably the only police officer in the country who's seen all the evidence and understands the full scope of what's been happening. If I don't follow through, it gets buried forever. At 7:30, James walked on to the Millennium Bridge. The iconic pedestrian span across the Thames was busy with evening tourists and commuters, providing excellent cover for a clandestine meeting. He positioned himself at the midpoint of the bridge and waited. Sir Anthony Pemberton approached from the south side, walking with the measured pace of someone completely comfortable with his power and authority. He was accompanied by two men who were obviously bodyguards, though they maintained a discreet distance. Inspector Mitchell, thank you for coming. Where is Sarah Parker? Miss Parker is safe and comfortable. She's been staying at a private facility where she can receive the counseling and support she needs during this difficult time. The euphemism was chilling in its implications. I want to see her. I'm afraid that's not possible just now. Miss Parker has been under considerable stress, and her doctors feel that additional interrogation might be harmful to her recovery. James understood that Sarah was being held against her will, probably drugged to keep her compliant. What do you want? I want you to understand the position you've put yourself in, Inspector. You've been investigating matters that are far beyond your authority and expertise. You've been manipulated by individuals with their own agenda, who have fed you a carefully constructed narrative designed to damage the reputation of people who have devoted their lives to public service. The documents I've seen are real. Documents can be taken out of context. Situations can be misrepresented. Young people can be encouraged to make accusations that are not supported by facts. Sir Anthony's tone remained reasonable, even sympathetic, but James could hear the steel beneath the diplomatic language. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that you return to focusing on the original theft complaint. Thomas Hartwell unlawfully removed documents from Clarence House. That's a straightforward criminal matter that can be resolved quickly and quietly. And the other evidence? The pattern of cover-ups and financial irregularities? Inspector, you're a police officer, not an investigative journalist. Your job is to investigate specific crimes that have been reported to you, not to go fishing for broader conspiracies. James realized that Sir Anthony was offering him the same deal that Harrison had presented earlier. Focus on the narrow theft case and ignore everything else. And if I refuse, then you'll discover that conducting unauthorized investigations into sensitive matters can have serious consequences for everyone involved. Miss Parker, for example, might find that the stress of this situation has affected her memory of past events. Lady Margaret might realize that her long-standing financial difficulties could be resolved through more productive channels than making wild accusations. And you might find that your own conduct during this investigation has raised questions about your fitness to continue in your current position. The threats were carefully veiled, but unmistakable. James was being told that refusing to cooperate would result in Sarah Parker being permanently silenced, Lady Margaret being bought off or destroyed, and his own career being ended. I need time to consider your offer. You have until tomorrow morning to make your decision. And Inspector, I should mention that Miss Parker's continued well-being depends on your choosing wisely. As Sir Anthony walked away with his escorts, James remained on the bridge, looking out over the Thames and trying to process the impossible choice he was being forced to make. He could surrender the evidence, arrest Thomas Hartwell for theft, and allow one of the most serious cases of corruption he'd ever encountered to be swept under the carpet. Sarah Parker would be released, probably with a substantial payment to ensure her continued silence. Lady Margaret would be neutralized through a combination of threats and inducements. And the system that had been protecting powerful predators while destroying their victims would continue to operate. Or he could refuse, knowing that it would almost certainly result in Sarah Parker being permanently silenced, Lady Margaret being destroyed, and his own career being ended. There was no guarantee that the evidence would ever see the light of day. And even if it did, the people responsible might be too powerful to prosecute. James's phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Couldn't wait for you to check in. The story is going to print tomorrow morning. Everything you showed me, plus additional material from sources who came forward after hearing I was working on the royal scandal. It's too late to stop it now. For the first time in hours, James smiled. While he had been agonizing over impossible choices, Rachel had been doing what journalists do, pursuing the story wherever it led, regardless of the consequences. The investigation that had started with a simple theft complaint was about to become front-page news across the country. Whatever happened next, the truth about the system of corruption and abuse that had operated behind palace walls was finally going to be exposed to public scrutiny. James turned away from the Thames and began walking toward his car. He had a phone call to make to Thomas Hartwell, a missing person report to file for Sarah Parker, and a career-defining decision to make about how to proceed with the most important investigation of his professional life. Tomorrow morning, the entire country would wake up to headlines that would shake the monarchy to its foundations, and James Mitchell would finally discover whether the British justice system was strong enough to hold the powerful accountable for their crimes, or whether some people truly were above the law.